Ugh, blimey. I'm here in the woods. I've been here all week actually, and my mission this week is to split these beautiful sweet chestnut logs into halves. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of show you the process, the thinking behind it and the actual physical process. It's quite a physical thing. My arms are aching after 4 days of doing this. And essentially what we have to do is work with the physical qualities of the tree, the grain, to try and get two decent halves from one log. Might sound easy, and depending on the tree that you're working on, it's more or less easy. Some grain will twist, some might have branches or knots in it which prohibit a split from opening. So part of this sort of skill really, and it's a very ancient skill that we're looking at, but a part of this skill is in your initial tree selection. There's no point, for example, in choosing the base of a sweet chestnut tree, the first couple of meters, because that's where the tree takes all of the pressure from the windage above. The wind on the boughs and the leaves means that this base of the trunk is incredibly strong, quite difficult to split, and generally it tends to twist in the grain. So if we wanted two perfect halves, that part of the tree simply won't do it. So we have to, first of all, before we even get to this stage, we have to walk through the woods. We have to select trees with a visibly straight grain. I'll show you how that's done. And then we set about the process of taking this and dividing it into two equal halves. That's the mission. Okay, so I've brought you over to an example of a tree that will not be good for splitting. Here we are, we're in this beautiful sweet chestnut wood. Quite tall trees, nice canopy above. But really the bit that we need to be looking at is the length that might do the job to get the diameter of posts and wood that we need. And you can see here that the grain, you can see it in the bark, the grain is twisting around the side of the tree. That means that when we insert our wedges to try and split, the actual tree will swivel and twist. We won't get two decent halves. There's also an obvious knot which will really hamper our progression if we're splitting. If we really had to, if we had no choice, we could split through that, but it wouldn't be pretty, it wouldn't be nice. So essentially what we're looking for are decent trees which give us everything we want. Here's a nice one, for example. So you can see in the bark we've got a really nice straight grain. It's quite parallel, quite a way up, and we would ignore the bottom 1.5 meters, maybe 2 meters, and take the 2.5 meters above that we needed. This is a really nice tree, and this is the kind of tree that we felled to do the task of the day. So you're probably wondering how we decide to start on a log. This has been felled and cross-cut to the right length, and essentially what I do first is I'm checking the entire length of the log for any sort of features which will prohibit splitting. So I'm looking for knots, I'm looking for strange twist in the grain which might be visible in the bark. I know that this log is a pretty decent one, cross fingers. You can never be certain until you actually start splitting. There might be things inside that stop the split from propagating. But on face value, this looks pretty good. So what I'm now looking at is the end grain here. And this is where you can see the rings of the tree, its growth. And what there is here is what's called a shake. So a shake is an internal split. As the tree was felled and crashed on the ground, because it's sweet chestnut, which is a timber that's prone to shaking, there's a very fine shake that runs right through the centre of the tree in this direction. Now, luckily for us, that's an ideal position to start our splitting from. It's probably best to work with that if we can. If we try to work across it, then we run the risk of one half of our timber actually splitting into two further pieces, in other words, into quarters. So there's a shake here. I'm going to try and use that. And so the first thing I need to do is to clear all of the bark off this line here using a draw knife to expose the wood itself so I can see where the crack propagates and where it runs. Because this mission really is about controlling where that crack runs. The draw knife is a fantastic tool. I'm using it bevel down, which is not what the textbooks will show you, but essentially it means that I can skin off the bark without diving into the wood. I don't want to mark any of this wood with modern tools because the point of this project is that eventually these logs, if they need any finishing, will be finished with stone tools. So what I'm trying to do is to get down through the bark. You can see the bark, sweet chestnut bark actually is a great material for rope making. In fact, it has many purposes. So we can take this bark and put it in a vat and with water, and the rich tannins in the bark will tan leather, as the name suggests. We can get fibres from this inner bark, make rope. It's a dye colour. You want a nice rich brown cloak in the past, you could use sweet chestnut to dye it. And obviously the timber itself lends itself to splitting projects, so paling, fencing, shingles is a classic. You can see how nicely this is coming off. There. Obviously, I have a fair bit of experience with this tool, so I know exactly the pressure to use, how to not skin my knuckles. But there it is. Okay, so the next stage really is to try and work out where we would prefer the split to run. So as I said previously, we've got this shake. I'm going to use that as my starting point. I've got here a chalk line, so I'm going to literally put that along the line of the shake, pull it tight, give it a twang, and we get a nice blue line on the timber. And now I'm going to run it back towards the butt end of the tree. So I'm just going to put that where the blue chalk line emerges. Obviously, I'd like it to run along my cleaned section of sapwood. And what I'm looking for now at this end is a line that will run through the center of the tree at the butt. Now, there we go. This is only approximate. This isn't, at this stage, because the tree curves slightly, this isn't a kind of a must follow line. This is a guide. And it may well be, because there is a slight curve in this tree, that actually somewhere down here we have to be this side of the line. So I'm going to use it, but it's a guide, not a sort of an absolute must. Just gives me an idea of when I'm running offline or online. And really, I think at the center here, I'm going to try and bring it back to here. Okay, so the next stage is I need to roll the log to get to the other side to strip the bark in exactly the same way. I'm obviously using a modern tool here. This is called a cant hook. You have to be careful in the woods moving logs because they're heavy things. Simple hook, lever, and we don't want it to go off down the hill, but I've put a wedge on the floor down there so that hopefully, that's not far off actually, we can get this blue line orientated to the top, which will make life nice and easy for us. Just looking at it there, stick my wedge in, ready to go. So, same rules apply. We need to skin this bark. Hopefully you'll see it a bit closer this time. Trying to get down, you can see the darker, glossier sapwood appearing. That's what we're after. And really, one of the joys of working in the woods at this time of the year are the noises. We've obviously got the bird song. We've got a very distant noise of traffic, which is unfortunate, but if I just shut up for a second, you'll hear the tools at work. So obviously now we're after our second chalk line. Run that out. Needs to go through the centre of the tree down here, so let's do that. We've got our chalk line. That's where we roughly want to start our split, and that's running coincidentally with the shake, the natural shake. What I need to do is to make sure that wedges will go into that line. So I'm using this splitting maul. Again, this could easily be a flint tool, and my beetle, my mallet, and crucially I'm starting at the centre of the tree. What I don't want is any further shakes running off in either direction. So one of my wedges will definitely start dead centre, and I'm just making sure that this runs somewhere close to that line, right to the edge of the tree. There it is. Oop. Now you probably can't see from where you are, but as I tap that in, the crack initiated. It's literally just started running there. I can see actually, now that the bark is off, that the grain is twisting ever so slightly that way. This might be a problem log. Something like that. Okay, so now we begin really. This is where the serious work starts. I'm slightly concerned already because having opened that crack slightly, it immediately started diving off. So I'm suspecting already that this log is quite seriously twisted, but I'm going to show you the process, the principle. So the first thing we need to try and do is get any wedge we can into the centre of this tree. So I've chosen a intentionally very narrow one. I'm making sure I cross the heart of the tree right there, and the secret at this stage is just to make that stay. I'm going to demonstrate. If I hit it too hard, it will literally jump out because there's too much pressure forcing the wedge out. So at this stage we are literally just trying to make it stay gently, and then we're looking for wedges either side of this. If we do this unevenly, what will happen is the wood will split randomly in a different direction to the one we want. So it's really crucial that we try and maintain an even pressure as we go, which sometimes is easier said than done. So that's 3 in. I'm going to take that one out because it's a bit too long. It's going to make the next stage slightly harder. So in it goes. Slightly tenuous. And then immediately, using something slightly narrower, I'm going to work from the edge. So I'm going to try and stick one in there. And you can hear the sort of hollow noise that's making. Which is good. I'm going to try and get one in on the other side. This is literally just to propagate that first crack. It's quite solid. Now, if I did this video in real time, you'd literally be watching potentially for 3 hours, sometimes an hour, if it's going really well. So I'm going to bring you back in stages once I've got it going in the way I want it to move, because there's a critical bit I really need to show you in terms of how to control where the crack runs. So I'm just sticking another one in this side here. And the very long process has begun. So here we are. Wedges have gone in the end. Just managed to get 3 larger ones in there. And here you can see the crack initiating. And the crucial bit when we're doing this is we're looking not here where the crack is obvious and wide. We're looking right at the very beginnings of it. So in this case, here somewhere. And if this is running offline, we put a wedge ahead of it where we want the split to run to. And in that way, we can control roughly where the split runs. At the moment, it's working okay, but obviously we have to check both sides and keep a gentle applied pressure. Bit of general just trying to make sure that everything is running where I want it to run. So I'm looking at the initiating crack all the way down here now. It's obvious there, not obvious here, so I'm going to stick a wedge in where I want it to run to. What you probably can't see from there is that it's just jumped back to this split, and that means I'm controlling its course. It's probably been another 10 minutes, and what we need to do is really control this side, I think, by getting that in there. Okay, what I'd like to try and do, if it's at all possible, is to help you understand the sound that I'm hearing as I do this. So I'm just going to pull out my microphone, and when I tap, I want you to listen out for a high-pitched cracking noise. And that's the sound of the wood fibres literally tearing apart. This crack is running really nicely, not so much on the other side. I'll be sure to show you that because that's actually far more problem solving at the moment. But this side's going well. Just had a cup of tea, and even while I was sitting there listening to the birds, the timber was still splitting. I could hear the fibres, the sort of ding, 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 as I was sitting on the log. So it's one of these processes that can't be rushed. If you rush it, you end up ruining a beautiful piece of timber. So you just got to sort of coerce the fibres to split in the direction you want, really. Really nicely at this end. So far I've avoided any sort of secondary shakes. So we're just going for that basic split. And replace that one with a slightly fatter one. The secret really is to maintain pressure evenly as you go. If you just wellied the end wedge in the centre of the tree would shake and split in a multitude of directions. And you'd see a grown man weep. Okay. You hear that hollow noise? That's obviously something internally being released suddenly. And it went really hollow. You hear that? Compared to that. So again, we're listening for all of those noises, those telltales. I'm now watching the end of the log, this end, because this side is desperately trying to twist. The grain is sending the split, wants to come up and over the top. So I'm having to adjust. I'll show you this just before the whole thing comes apart. It's not pretty this side, but it doesn't have to be pretty. It needs to keep it slightly on line, which is what it's managing to do at the moment. So this is the other side, and remember what I said right at the beginning, the blue line is a guide. So the crack initiated, and at this point it was running way too high. So what I did was I put in a sort of step cut, wedged that out, which is bringing it down closer to where I want to go. But if you compare this side to the other side, The other side is almost immaculate, and this is where the hard work is going on. The split is desperately trying to run up and over there, and I'm trying desperately to keep it down to maintain a half of the log. So I'm putting in slots with the splitting maul, and then I'm inserting wedges, trying to keep it down. Perfect world, we get 2 halves, 2 usable halves. Less than perfect world, we get 1 usable half and some firewood. But let's see how it goes. So we're getting somewhere close now. Just moving some of these much wider wedges along and doubling them up to get a bit more pressure on the split. And what you might be able to see in this glorious spring sunshine is that occasionally there's a place where the split isn't running efficiently. It's sort of having to jump to my wedges. So I just need to make sure that that's cut through with an axe. Call them ties because they essentially tie the log together. We don't want that. We want the log to fall apart. But really now, we're getting very close. Very close. Hopefully, close enough for it to fall apart. And yes, we have a nice split through the base. So what I'm going to do is just make sure it's through here, which it seems to be. Yep, that's gone. So I'm going to collect my wedges. Wedges are my precious tools in the woods. Don't want to lose these because I've got more to do. Stick those over there. Any that come out freely I take out at this stage. Some literally just drop out, some don't. If they don't, they're still under load, so that one's staying. And then I'm going to roll the log onto its back, and I may have to cut some ties to make it fall open. Get this open here. It's going to go, I think. So just to recap, this is not, by no means a perfectly split piece of timber, but actually, to be fair to me, the grain definitely twisted. You can see it on this side really clearly actually. So started off horizontally and the grain twists that way, and despite my attempts to kind of correct that, it still maintained a bit of twist. What we've got here is stuff that will have to be adzed off. I mean, look at that grain. Look at that grain. Isn't that? Look at that. That is fantastic. And the few bits that are a bit sort of loose, this will be the work of the stone adze next. But essentially the point of riving or splitting wood like this is that you end up with this fantastic grain which is split naturally where it wants to split, and so therefore creates a much tougher surface, a longer lasting surface in terms of weathering. At the moment, I mean, look at that. At the moment, it's a beautiful sort of hazelnut brown shade. As this is exposed to the elements, it will turn a beautiful silver grey. So the finished look will be grain, silver grey, and where required, bits like this, a bit of stone adze work, which will create beautiful scallops in that grain. But there we go, that's the fundamentals of how to split timber using wooden wedges. So I'm hoping you've understood part of this process. It's an incredibly ancient process. There's some incredible evidence from Germany, 7,000 years old, of planks being split from large timbers during the early Neolithic. And you think about the tools I've used today, well, the key ingredient really is the wedge. This is what mechanically opens the wood. Reasonably simple to produce, although like everything in these traditional crafts, there's a skill behind it and a fundamental knowledge. You can very easily make a bad wedge, which will split and break as you strike it. So just the knowledge that goes into a wedge is quite sophisticated, but nevertheless a simple thing, a mechanical device. We've got an axe. Again, as I've said earlier, it could be a stone axe, this is a steel axe. And that's really just to kind of start those, that way into the wood to then introduce the wedge. But probably the most useful tool, the most vital tool, is the beetle, the mallet. And this one probably weighs about, what's that, 5 kilos maybe? And the job would literally be impossible without this. This is the workhorse of this whole exercise, as is my arm and my physicality. So hopefully you've understood now that splitting timber is in simple terms an art. You can do it really quickly and really badly, but if you take your time and you understand about almost reverse engineering, trying to work ahead of where you want the split to run, you can produce decent halves or quarters or eighths or sixteenths from a piece of timber like this. And really it's a fundamental, very ancient way of taking large trees, and without the use of saws, which is a very modern invention, by that I mean the last 2,000 years, without using saws, you can reduce large pieces of timber to workable planks or wedges or segments to then be turned into other things. But I hope you've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.